Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makudiri. The time is 8:36 a.m. Central African time. And our second story takes us to Turkey, which I think there's an interesting development in that part of the world. Turkey has issued international arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and 36 other senior Israeli officials, accusing them of genocide and crimes against humanity in Gaza. This decision, led by Istanbul's chief public prosecutor office, has named top figures, including Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, and the army's chief of staff, Eyal Zamir. And we're going to be unpacking this development and, looking at how important is it? Is it symbolic? Is it really, something that we can look at and say, well, it could yield some kind of positive response from relevant authorities? And for Turkey in itself, how much of this is it a strong statement against the genocide that has been committed against the people of Gaza, and all of the atrocities that we've seen in that part of the world in the last few years? And to help us do that, we're joined by a very good friend of the station, independent researcher and analyst Mariam Çarikçi. She's been closely following Turkey's evolving role as a vocal advocate for justice in Gaza, and she has wonderful insights, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Mariam, assalamu alaikum. Always a pleasure having you on air, and really, really looking forward to this eye-opening and very important conversation.
Walaikum salam, Salailo. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
I think let's jump right into it. If you can give us a bit more insight on, Turkey and, this new development, the chief public prosecutor's office issuing those warrant of arrest for Benjamin Netanyahu and 37 Israeli officials. What can we make of it? Can you give us a quick analysis of it, and then we'll take it from there, looking at other details?
Okay, so exactly as you said, it's an Istanbul court, so it's a domestic Turkish court that has issued these arrest warrants for the 37 Israeli officials. And that is on the charge of genocide and crimes against humanity. And interestingly, it's linking the crimes committed against the global Sumud flotilla and those in Gaza. So it's almost like a seamless crime scene as such. And why Turkey can do this is because they've actually built the Genocide Convention and international humanitarian law into their domestic law. So essentially, what we can say would come out of this is that Turkish courts could prosecute these crimes even if they happen abroad and the suspects are foreigners. So essentially, any of those ministers or Netanyahu had to use Turkish flag vessels or enter Turkish airspace or land, they would then be charged with the genocide for crimes against humanity. So if you want to think about it in terms of historical precedent, we could also use Spain as an example of when it tried to pursue Pinochet. They used the same concept of domesticating the Genocide Convention, and in that way, European courts were actually able to pursue those war crimes.
And I want to unpack a bit on that, because Turkey says it's acting under universal jurisdiction. Could you explain a bit further what that means and how strong the legal standing is under both Turkish and international law?
Okay, so basically, no one is expecting Netanyahu to be dragged to Istanbul tomorrow, right? But his circle of safe countries has just shrunk again. So essentially, what we're saying is that in strict legal terms, it binds Turkey, and not necessarily the rest of the world, but it binds Turkish territory and airspace, as I said, as no-go areas for the Israeli officials and Netanyahu. So other states are not obligated to act on this Turkish warrant, but politically, and this is the important part, politically and symbolically, it says a lot, because it comes on top of the ICC warrants, and that comes on top of the ICJ case. So what we're seeing is the ICJ case is where Israel is being taken to court as a state. Then with the ICC, we see individuals being, taken to court. So it's prosecuting Netanyahu and individual ministers. And here we're looking at national law of a NATO ally. Remember, NATO, Turkey is a NATO member. This is not, I wouldn't want to use the word Mickey Mouse, but I mean, it's not just a random country. This is a very strong US partner that's actually taken, very, very strong steps in terms of its domestic policy against Israel.
And I want to touch on that specific element diplomatically. Where does this position Turkey? You spoke about the NATO element of it. You spoke about Turkey being a very, very strong, character when it comes to his positioned globally, within the Middle East and parts of Europe. And what does it say about the broader foreign policy posture that Turkey has taken when it comes to, dealing with this genocide? I mean, there's been all talks of, cutting trade ties with Israel and also closing airspace to Israeli flights. Where does this one particular element fit in the, greater conversation around Turkey's response to this genocide?
No, indeed, Salalo, I think it basically just reinforces the economic front, right? So we've had a complete cutting off of economic ties with Israel, which has come, at a domestic cost, of course, for Turkish, ordinary Turks, but they are willing to pay that price for the moral conscience, obviously, that has to be accounted for. But looking at this as a very public statement, as I said, coming from a NATO ally, and a country that actually, let's be honest, Turkey had very strong relations with Israel in its early years of existence. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire in particular, it was one of the first countries to recognize Israel. So if we're looking at the sharp deviation under the Erdogan administration from being a pro-Israel ally, you can see that there is definitely an existing contradiction now, where you see that Turkey, which is the NATO ally and it hosts US assets, as well as having just received a F-16 deal with the US. Washington's just unfrozen that deal. And then on the other hand, the US has rejected the ICC warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. So basically what Turkey is doing, and I think very cleverly, is it's basically trying to say that if you don't work with us, we can essentially unravel three core areas of partnership, which is Gaza and Syria, where Turkey is basically, the strongest ally to the new regime, and also in Sudan. So, Salilo, it's very important. We must not forget that what's happening in Gaza and in Palestine is being reflected in Africa, and in particular in Sudan, with regard to the use of the UAE as a proxy for US and Israeli interests. And this is where Turkey has taken a different stance. It's actually now, together with Egypt, running a joint command center in northern Kordofan providing drone technology to the SAF, to counter the RSF, which is UAE backed. So we're seeing a very strong divergence here of Turkey, Egypt, Qatar on the one side versus the UAE and Israel on the other side. And it's being played out on African soil. And this comes back to the idea that we need to recognize that our struggles, whether they're African or Middle Eastern, are connected. As long as we have, as long as resources are plundered and exploited, not for the benefit of our own people, we need to be awake to the fact that, it's foreign powers that are basically determining what's happening on our soil.
Most definitely. I think it's very, very important to make those links there. Israel has dismissed the warrants as political theater, as expected. How do you respond to that? And does this, criticism overlook the growing global demand for accountability? They are increasingly becoming isolated, but it looks like they don't want to admit it or wake up to that fact.
Look, the thing is, it's Israel could say that it's theater, right? But it actually, this is where the global Sumud flotilla, we could say that there was a blessing almost, in the sense that it didn't necessarily reach Gaza, but it was diverted, and many of the activists were sent to Istanbul. And at Istanbul, there were hundreds of pages of documentation taken from activists and lawyers and MPs and people like Greta Thunberg. So over 450 people were detained and taken back to Istanbul. So they have literally, the evidence, documented evidence to support these actions against Israel. So in the sense, of course, Israel is going to say that, but it's not something that's pulled out because of feeding to a domestic base, which of course it will do. But I mean, it stands on very, a strong foundation of evidence. And another thing, Salilo, is that we must remember that despite what Netanyahu said, let's consider the fact that Ahmed al-Sharaa is at the White House right now. So he's in Washington. And what that means is that basically it's changed the optics. Washington is basically rolling out a red carpet to Turkey's ally at the same time that Turkey is trying to criminalize Israel. So we're having a very strong divergence, I think, in how the US perceives Turkey and how Israel wants Turkey to be isolated.
Almost definitely. Mariam, thank you so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and have to leave it here for now. But yeah, as always, a pleasure chatting to you. And thank you for those wonderful insights.
Thank you, Salalo.
There you go. That was independent researcher Mariam Jooma Çarikçi giving us, I think, a bit of clarity to a very, very important turn of events coming from a very, very important, I think, player when it comes to the Middle East, the link between the West and the Middle East, which is Turkey. And yeah, very, very important one to look out for. And I think it goes beyond the courtroom in essence. I think it's a statement of political will and moral courage in a world where justice often bends to power, I should say. And whether or not these arrest warrants are even enforced, I think Turkey has made it clear impunity for atrocities will not go unchallenged. And it'll be interesting to see how it pans out in the next couple of days. We've come to the end of this segment. We're going to take a quick break. News and views. We'll be back with you after this.